Our next speaker has a slightly different tone. In fact, I have long been jealous of him because of comments like this found in a Google search under his name. If you type Jonathan Capehart into Google, one of the first things that comes up is a 7,000-page blog that talks about that has several paragraphs of just pure celebration of our next speaker. And I will only quote two little bits of this long celebration. Handsome and stylish to boot, always beautifully turned out, he has a modest yet outgoing demeanor, and not surprisingly, lots and lots of friends, not only among the high and mighty, but also among the just folks and working stiffs who make up dynamic New York City. And one other thing. Who among us would not like to be characterized as dapper, dashing, friendly, but with an agreeable air of authority? Jonathan Capehart has developed this agreeable air of authority in years of writing as an editorial page writer and as a journalist at publications including the New York Daily News, the Washington Post. He has served on editorial boards, but also done some hosting for television shows, such as PBS's series In the Life. And you may have caught him recently, if you're a subscriber to Logo, the lesbian and gay cable channel, holding Barack Obama's feet to the fire about his position on gay marriage. So among all of our panelists, I think Jonathan Capehart has maybe the least direct tie to architecture, and yet also has an unusual degree of breadth in the type of topics he's written about, from Saving the Apollo Theater to dealing with migrant farm worker poverty to writing about and advising Mayor Michael Bloomberg on his campaign for mayor and potential future political aspirations. Our next speaker, Jonathan Capehart, his talk is titled, Who Knows?
Before I start, I just have to say to Sean Kirst, sir, if you are a pair of brown shoes, I can only hope to fill them. And that was just the most incredible speech, and I think it was extemporaneous, but it was so heartfelt, it was fantastic. And in just one presentation, you saw why I love being a journalist. That heart and passion and, in some cases, fury, is what drives me, at least, every day to tell the stories that come my way and that I can actually get my editors interested in. So thank you very much for that fantastic, fantastic speech. I also want to say, I read your column before going to sleep last night, and one of the best phrases I've seen in a very long time was in that column. The crack pipe of quick dollars. Loved that. Can I use it? I'll credit you. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for embarrassing me in front of all of these people. Thank you for that introduction. Chancellor, it's great to, well, she was here, she's gone, but Chancellor, it was great to see you. And thank you, and thank you, Dean Robbins, very much for inviting me to participate in this symposium. It's wonderful to see you again. I wish I had a dean in college as swank as Dean Robbins, but I didn't. And it's also wonderful to see the university campus and to tour Newhouse 3. I don't know if I told you this, Dean, but I applied to the journalism school, and I was accepted, but to the class of '89, but I opted to go to Carleton College in Minnesota, what we affectionately call the Harvard of the Midwest. Now, sort of like Sean Kirst, I must admit to feeling not quite up to snuff to be a part of all this. And poor Matthew Aitchison, thank you very much, Matthew. I don't know where you are, but I want to thank him for his persistence, perseverance, and patience with me. He was sending me emails almost daily asking me for my abstract. which for me, I'm like, what's that? And every time I saw that email, all I could think was, well, who knows? So I got to thinking, when do everyday people really pay attention to, follow, or care about architecture, or their built environment, or their surroundings? In recent years, it's been in the aftermath of a catastrophe. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. A spectacularly beautiful morning in New York City that became one of the darkest days in our nation's history. Monday, August 29th, 2005. The howling winds of Hurricane Katrina that blew through New Orleans were nothing compared to the horror unleashed by the storm surge it created. The federally designed and constructed levee system, a system that thousands of residents of the Crescent City entrusted with their lives, failed, as did the government in responding to the worst natural disaster and possibly the biggest internal migration in this country's history. Friday, May 4th, 2007. A Force 5 tornado practically wiped Greensburg, Kansas right off the map in the middle of the night. New York City, New Orleans, Greensburg, Kansas. Each place was dealt a tragic hand, but each place is striving to turn tragedy into opportunity, into a chance to right some wrongs, into an opening to make better decisions for their future. But the fights can be furious. Witness New York City. 6 years after the World Trade Center crumbled to the ground, barely anything is in its place. There were fights over what to do at the site, fights over who controlled the site, fights over who would control the process, fights over who would do the master plan, fights over who would do the design, fights over funding. You get the idea. A similar process is playing out in New Orleans. After many failed starts and intense fighting between the mayor and the governor in Washington, and the mayor in Washington, and everyone else for that matter, a detailed plan focused on 17 distinct areas around the city that will hopefully spark reinvestment and revitalization has emerged. Meanwhile, Greensburg, Kansas is putting both places to shame. The town and its leaders have banded together to design a new home, an affirmatively eco-friendly place that everyone hopes will make them better able to withstand the next tornado, while at the same time saving energy and doing their part to save the planet. Now, I don't know the particulars of how Greensburg got buy-in from its citizens, but there's no doubt the media played a part. In small-town America, the relationships are more intimate, 6 degrees of separation, and probably more like 2. Would that were the case in New Orleans or New York City? And let me focus on New York City because that's the place I know best. Getting things done, whether that's disseminating information, deciding what to do next, or actual rebuilding in an emergency, requires a web of interconnecting relationships of media, government, the public, civic organizations, and business groups. The bigger the city, the more tenuous those relationships can be. And in an emergency, it's too late to forge the kind of relationships between urban planners and architects and government officials and the public where all are coming at rebuilding from the same knowledge base and ideals. It is here that the press plays a vital role. Now, having been in an 11-year relationship with Giuseppe Lignano of low-tech architecture, I know what y'all think of non-architecture journalists like me who write about architecture from time to time, and it ain't pretty, but it's understandable. But I would have to argue that that thinking has to change. With the focus on climate change, sustainable development, green building, architects and urban planners must become more active and visible participants in the conversations that are going on. No longer can you think of yourselves as being above politics. If you want to reshape the way cities look and the decisions that are made, you got to start learning to play the game. And you start by demystifying architecture. Frank Gehry is doing it, one Bilbao-like structure and one piece of Tiffany jewelry at a time. But more needs to be done. Not everyone is or can be Frank Gehry or Michael Graves or Raphael Vignoli or any of the other star architects whose names roll trippingly off the tongues of people not steeped in what you do. And as a matter of disclosure, I should tell you that I worked with Mr. Vignoli during my stint as a senior counselor at a public relations firm. He was great fun to work with, sort of an Uruguayan version of my ex Giuseppe, but I digress. Demystifying architecture is easier than you think. First and foremost, please, you have to start talking in a language that everyday people can understand. And then, and then you must forge alliances. But that requires a patience and persistence that is in short supply in today's world. It's not enough to have the architecture critic of the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or the Cleveland Plain Dealer or the architect's newspaper on speed dial. Have you ever sat down with the city hall reporters of your local outlets? How about the media covering the state legislature and the governor? And what about the columnists? Well, you've got Sean, so. But what about the columnists in places where you will one day live or go back to? And what about the editorial boards that can give the governor, the mayor, or the legislature a headache with one well-timed piece? Do you know the governor, the majority and minority leaders of the state senate, the speaker of the assembly, the relevant committee chairs, the mayor, the relevant deputy mayor? And if you don't know any of them, do you know the key person or people on their staffs who you can talk to? Is there an up-and-coming member of the city council who is good on architecture and urban planning and design, or who has shown an interest? Or is there an up-and-comer not yet in office who has done what I just described? Have you partnered with civic organizations? I'm thinking of the Municipal Art Society in New York City, the Brookings Institution in Washington, which just released a report on metro regions. Or what about chambers of commerce like the Association for a Better New York or Partnership for New York City, where business and politics unite? And what about institutions of higher learning like Syracuse? Now, that's a symbiotic relationship that's just waiting to happen, and it's already happening here. But are those relationships in place in other cities around the country? Now, there are two reasons to do all this. The first is to educate. You can't get angry with reporters like me over what they've written, or get angry with government officials and business leaders over what they've said to the press if you're not going to try to reach out to them to start a dialogue. The second reason to do all this is to learn. Learn how reporters do their jobs and what motivates a business leader to support one project over another, or what goes into the complicated and seemingly nonsensical calculus that is behind the decisions of public officials. What I've done is just given you the thumbnail for a roadmap for a campaign, a sustained effort to raise awareness of the press and therefore the public and elected officials to the importance of what you do and how you can help. Corporations and even individuals pay thousands of dollars a month to get the advice and counsel I just gave you for free. Will this work? Will your brand of campaign yield results you want? Will the press come around to understanding things from your perspective? Will government be responsive to your views and ideas? Will business give you the opportunity to turn your vision into reality? To all that, I can only ask, who knows? Now that I've told you what I think you should do, it's up to you to find out. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jonathan.